let's have a look at business points of view and let's understand how different business models think about what it is that they're doing. So if you look at businesses, they've got a continuum, if you like, from right to left. So there's extremes on each end, which I'm going to explain to you, but then there are businesses which fall in between those parts. So they take different parts of each of these ideas. But if you look at most of the big companies that we deal with, if you look at Sunlum, or if you look at Old Mutual or Liberty or ABSA or any of the other big financial services companies, they are large commercial enterprises, as are the mining companies, as are the drug companies, which are helping to deliver, hopefully, some vaccines for us in the next few months, which could help us get back to a world where things are a little easier to work with. But at the end of the day, all of these companies are commercial in nature. Now, what that means, and this is very important to understand, is that their purpose is to make profit. So a commercial entity operates in a fairly simple way. Their job is to create a product and to then market the need for that product. So they come up with an invention and they try and make people want that invention. So they create a need for it. And that's what advertising and marketing are all about. It's about the creation of needs. So what do the companies that we deal with do? They create products and then they advertise certain outcomes. So Alan Gray don't go on television and advertise how their product works. They don't explain the engine inside it. They advertise long-term outcomes. They advertise emotional requirements, other things along those lines. If you look at an ad for a Volvo car, they don't explain to you how the engine works or what the value of the nuts and bolts are or why certain things work in certain ways. They advertise an emotional outcome that comes from that. So by using product placement, by using pricing strategies, by using promotions, commercial entities create a need for their product and they make money by selling as much of that product as possible. Now, is that a bad thing? No. It's called capitalism. It's how most companies in the world operate these days. But when they're making decisions, and this is what's important, they have a fairly simple model that they follow, and that is, in making the decision that I'm making, will it increase or decrease my profit? And that's how I will make the decision at the end of the day. There are other factors that may get taken into context, but the simple job that a board has at a commercial entity is to ensure profit for their shareholders. That's the number one decision-making process that they will follow. So a commercial enterprise out on the extreme wing will make every decision based on whether it will be profitable or not, and they'll use research and development, and they'll use other tactics to do that. So for simplicity, if you look at an insurance company, they have a product, they make their money by selling as much of that product as possible. If you look at a drug company, they have pills in a box and they make money by selling as many of those pills as possible. So that's how a commercial entity works. That's how a commercial entity thinks. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, so if we've got pure commercial entities operating purely for profit at one end, we've then got what we can call professions out at the other end. And profession has become a problematic word because it has so many definitions now. If you compete in sport and you are paid to do that, we will use the word professional sports person. I think there are certain groups that people accept as professionals because they've defined themselves that way. That might be lawyers, that might be accountants, that might be engineers, and various other groups, doctors, that I'm sure that you could think of. But if you start to ask what defines a professional, your definitions start to become a bit broader. And it's interesting in our industry because there's quite a movement to try and professionalize financial advice. I think a lot of us listening today would like to be considered professionals rather than being considered as a salesperson or a sales-based business. And the industry around the world has done things like looking at lawyers and doctors and accountants and saying, well, what makes you professional? And they come up with answers like education. So education is a component of what makes somebody professional. They will say, well, lawyers and accountants charge fees, therefore charging fees is something that makes people professionals. And the problem with those definitions, although they are important, is that they're not always true. There's not a logical connection that says if you charge a fee, you are a professional. A fee is an agreed payment for an agreed service. So I had people out to my house to look at my sprinkler system, and they said it's going to cost this much money to get this result. So I paid it, and I paid that fee. That doesn't mean that they're professionals just because they are agreeing to a fee. If you've got someone who helps you in the house, if you've got a domestic, you've got an agreed payment in exchange for an agreed service. So you're paying them a fee. That doesn't make them a professional as such. If you look at education, you can get degrees in all kinds of things in the world these days. So you can get a degree in 15th century French art. You can go all the way to a PhD in it if you want to. Does that make you a professional? And the answer is not necessarily. I wouldn't view somebody in that instance as a professional. Are teachers professionals? So there's a whole range of questions that start to come into this now. So a lot of years ago, I spent a lot of time trying to work this out and trying to understand what a professional is and what makes them different to a commercial entity. And I found a group called the Institute of Global Ethics, who have a lot of really wonderful, well thought out papers. And they wrote a paper 15, 16 years ago, looking at this question and asking a deep question: what actually defines somebody as a professional? And the answer that they came to was actually quite simple. And they did it by looking at the word itself. So profession comes from the word profess. Profess means to make a pledge or an assurance. So a professional, the definition of the word is someone who makes a promise. So making a promise is part of the definition. So lots of different businesses, I suppose, make promises. That's perhaps what we could call a value proposition. Maybe we should stop calling them value propositions and we should start calling them promises. But they took the definition further, and they said it's not only about making a promise. To be a professional, what you do, what you have knowledge about, what you serve people with has to be dangerous. It has to include what they call dangerous methods. So if I misuse the knowledge or skills that I have, I can do damage to people. So an easy analogy here would be to think about a doctor. If a doctor is going to undertake surgery and they misuse their knowledge, they can do very serious damage. If they misdiagnose because they didn't use their knowledge properly, they then can do very serious damage. So the next layer that's important is, one, it's somebody who makes a promise, but two, it's somebody who has access or knowledge of dangerous methods and promises to only use those to serve the society in which they live in return for the license to use those dangerous methods. So the professional promises to put the interests of their society, their clients, above their own self-interests while acting in that role. Now, that is really important to understand about how I'm making a decision. A commercial entity's key decision is, will I sell the product? A professional's key decision is, how does this affect the client? And I need to make sure the client is okay before I worry about any product sales. So that's a very different point of view on business and how it works. So one of the other things is, you'll notice that professionals don't market the way commercial companies do. You don't see advertisements for accounting firms on television or on the radio regularly. Legal practices in the main don't advertise their services. Now, the reason for that is that their marketing is done much more through a gravity mechanism. So they build a reputation for doing the right thing by their clients, and they then build their business through a referral network and through their reputation. So they don't have to spend a lot of money on marketing like a commercial company would. It's got a different function for them. They need to be focusing much more on form and much more on what they're trying to deliver to people. Now, as I've said, that's your two extremes. So at the one end, you've got purely professional businesses. I'm only worried about the client. At the other end, you've got purely commercial businesses. I am in this to make profit and to sell products. That's the end of my thinking. The reality in the world is most of us land somewhere in between those two. And that in itself is what's starting to create some of the difficulties for us about how we make decisions about what our business is and what it does.